It's a combination of demographics and geopolitics. So first, the geography angle. Russian territory sucks is really the very, very short version. I mean, you guys think that German agricultural land is a little questionable, but the outcome per hectare in Russia is less than a quarter of what you can pull off in Germany. And so the only way that they've ever found that they can exist is to run a rail system throughout their entire network. The problem is the growing season is so short, so they need more and more land to achieve the same thing. And when you don't have a very high density of capital like you do in Germany, that means the only way that you can get more income is to expand, and you become less and less and less dense. Well, anyone with a tank can disrupt that. So Russian history through the ages is about getting invaded from every possible direction. And the only way that they've ever found that this sort of low capital environment can be protected is if they continue to expand until they reach geographic blocking points where you can't run a Mongol horde through. And then they focus their relatively low-tech troops on the access points in between. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians do not control any of those access points. But they're on the way to the two most important ones, one of which is in Romania and one of which is in central Poland. The question was never, will the Russians invade Ukraine or will they try to take the whole country? They were always going to try to do this again, I might add. It was how long did they think they were going to need once they absorb Ukraine before they come for Warsaw? This has always been the beginning of a much broader military conflict, and I would argue that a lot of Europe is not ready for phase 2 yet. That's the geographic side. The demographic side is much simpler. The Russian population is dying out. Between World War I and Brezhnev and World War II and famines and then the post-Cold War collapse, this is the last generation that the Russians are going to have enough men of fighting age to attempt a military solution to their geographic problems. So the war was always going to happen, and it was always going to happen about now. The Russians, if they cannot achieve what they're after here, this is the end of the Russian Federation, and they know it. But they're hoping that if they can get to it's roughly analogous to the borders of the old Soviet Empire, not quite. If they can get back to a more forward defense, a crustal shell, in those circumstances, they can defend their frontiers with significantly fewer troops. And in 10 years, they will have significantly fewer troops. And so that means we have to find a way to help the Ukrainians to hold out, because the alternative is to be fighting the Russians in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Poland, and Romania at the same time. There really is a chance here that the Russian army will have its guts ripped out, and that'll be it. And this will be the last time we have to worry about this. However, if they still succeed in Ukraine, when they come to the Polish border, they will know that they can't stand against NATO forces. And they will bring the nuclear question up. And we will risk a general exchange. So it's important for everyone in NATO to make sure that this does not expand beyond Ukraine. Now, there's a problem on the other side there. I mean, outside Russian victory means we face a nuclear confrontation. Outsized Ukrainian victory doesn't destroy Russia's ability to wage war. And we're now in an environment where the Russians have paid all the prices for a major war but gotten none of the benefits. That's not going to last. So even if the Ukrainians are able to liberate Crimea and the Donbass, the Russians will try again and again and again until they can't. So the only way that Ukraine can be secure is to take out the logistical hubs in Western Russia that enable the assaults on Ukraine. So one way or another, this war is going beyond the Ukrainians' international borders. Everything from the numbers and the maps and the history suggests that there's no way the Russians can lose. But wow, they are pulling out the stops to try. I think what's given me the best hope right now that the Russians can actually lose is that Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu is still in his job, and he is arguably the least competent person on the planet right now. And as long as he is there absorbing massive amounts of the Russian defense budget for his own personal riches, I have hope that the Ukrainians ultimately can turn the numbers against the Russians. Now, if we ever see him actually get replaced by someone who actually has worn the uniform in combat, then we're dealing with a different situation. But we're not there yet. There's always the possibility for a French-style armistice, where everything just freezes for a while. But the Russians will only use that as an attempt to rearm, because if they stop where they are right now, even if they hold all the territory they have today, that's a loss for them. That means they're actually in a less advantageous strategic environment than they were at the first day of the war. So they have to press this. This is about national survival for them. The Chinese literally cut checks to both sides to sign. And before you say that that is artificial and why would the Chinese do it, we did that with Egypt and Israel. So it's not all that strange of a possibility. Now, in the case of the United States, we have kept cutting checks to them and the Palestinians and the Jordanians in order to buy peace in that region. I find it unlikely that the Chinese are going to do this for an extended period of time in the Gulf. Even if the Ukrainians experience an outsized success and are able to capture the entirety of the Donbass and isolate Crimea to the point that it generates a face-destroying surrender of Russian forces in the Crimea, that doesn't end this war. The Russians will start a new assault as soon as they're able, and then the Ukrainians would have to decide when and how to cross the border and neutralize those logistical hubs. Specifically, we're talking Belgorod, just north of Kharkiv, and Rostov-on-Don, which is where all the Crimean supplies and a fair amount of the Donbass supplies come in. Both of those cities would have to be removed from the equation. I was confident the war was going to happen, and I was equally confident that the Ukrainian portion of the conflict would be a walkover. How can the Ukrainians do? The fact that we're talking about this a year on is amazing. The Ukrainians have outsurprised by every possible metric, and to be perfectly blunt, I am more than a little shocked that the Americans have stepped in as they have, and that the Europeans have stepped in as they had. Because if you look at the last 30 years of European history, and especially, no offense, German history, it's been about appeasement. You have to remove the structural dependence on lands to your east. If you're looking for a way to free up options, which in a world that's changing, options are the best thing you can do, you need to make sure that your economic structure is not dependent on the reassertion of some pre-war environment, because that's not coming back. And even if it did, all that would do is put you back in the same position you're in. So that means largely removing natural gas from your fuel mix. Now, some people in Germany think you should do that for environmental reasons. I'm saying it's for security reasons, because right now you're dependent upon supplies from a hemisphere away, which is equally dangerous. That also means you need to turn your nuclear power plants back on. And that also means that your green community needs to make their peace with coal being your number one source of fuel for at least the next 20 years. Now, I would argue that the Green Party in Germany has already made their peace with coal. German carbon emissions, because of a lot of decisions you've made, are through the roof. They're going to stay high for decades. There's no way around that. Nuclear power plants are one of the few ways that you might be able to deal with that moving forward. But that also means that Germany's role as a major chemicals processor and producer is also over.